Good afternoon, everyone. It is Wednesday, August 25th, 2021, and this is Women in Business. Just me today, no guest. Sorry about that. You're just going to have to listen to me. But I do have what I think is an interesting topic today, at least I hope so. And one of the reasons that I wanted to cover this topic, which is letting go of the bad and embracing the good, is that it seems like lately on Facebook especially, I've been seeing a lot of people who are rehashing painful incidents in their life, or the fact that they had a bad parent or they had a bad relationship or whatever it was. And they're rehashing it in such a way that it's basically like, look at the horrible thing that was done to me. Everyone should feel bad for me, or that they want validation for the fact that something bad happened to them. And while I totally understand that urge, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I also don't necessarily know that it's the most healing thing or the most healthy thing. So I really feel like this is a topic that maybe needs some discussion, if only because I'm 52 now, and I've had a lot of time to learn how to get better at dealing with my own traumas. And I've learned a lot of lessons from it. And part of my healing is sharing what I've learned with others in hopes that it can help them. And it also helps make the stuff that was painful a little easier to deal with, because you can look at it and think, okay, I understand what happened and I can make something good out of it. So that's really what the purpose and the issue is. Cindy is here. Thank you for being here, Cindy. I really appreciate it. So that's really what the purpose of this show is just to talk about, here are some lessons that I've learned. Here's some things that I find helpful that maybe some of the rest of you will too. And it's not to say, if you're in the part of your cycle where you're rehashing events or you're looking for proof or validation of the fact that somebody hurt you, that's where you are in the process. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying, okay, here are some ways to look at the events that happened in your life. Now, I have to say, the first thing I'm going to start with is one that it took me a while to learn, which is very simply, have compassion for everybody, including the people that hurt you. Because most people don't hurt other people unless they've been hurt themselves in some way. And it doesn't make it right. I'm not saying that to excuse anything. I'm not saying that, just because someone is abused, if they abuse you, they had an excuse. No, that doesn't work. You're supposed to learn how to repair the damage and be better than what happened to you. But what I am saying is, look at the people who were in your life that maybe made things uncomfortable, or maybe made you feel bad about yourself, or maybe did something that was harmful to you, and understand that they were working out of a set of circumstances and damage that had happened to them. And have compassion for them. That doesn't mean you have to accept it. It doesn't mean you have to say what they did is right. It doesn't mean you even have to talk to them or like them or love them or accept them in any way at all. It just means you can look at the circumstances and feel compassion for what they went through and what they must have undergone that made them behave the way they did to you. And this is a really valuable tool, honestly, because it lets you humanize the people that hurt you. And one of the things that happens, I think, sometimes especially when you're a kid and somebody is harmful to you in some way, is you make them into a monster. They're all bad. They're all horrible. They're all terrible, whatever the adjective is that you want to use. And you can't see anything good in them. You can't see anything positive in them. All you can see is the damage that they did to you. And the thing is, if you can look at those people with compassion and see them as well-rounded people, you can also acknowledge that, yes, maybe your dad was a shit dad in most ways, but he also did good things. My father was not the perfect father for me, I'll say that. But he led my Girl Scout troop when I was in junior high, when I was a cadet, and he was surrounded by a bunch of prepubescent hormonal young women, and he led the troop. And he was one of the only male Girl Scout troop leaders in our troop, our council, our Girl Scout council. And he really did it. I mean, he was there and he led the meetings and he took us to camp and he did all the things that a Girl Scout leader is supposed to do. Now, does that excuse the other stuff that he did? No. But it also means he wasn't completely a monster, which when I was a kid, because I was a kid and I needed somebody to be the grown-up, I guess. My mother was a saint and my father was the devil, basically. Wasn't right. My mother was no more a saint than I am. And my father wasn't completely horrible. They both made bad choices. They both had issues. But when I got older, I could look at them with compassion and see, okay, they had their scars and their damage too. And that's where a lot of the things that they did came from. Now, like I said, that doesn't give anybody a pass. It doesn't give, if somebody hurts you or abuses you or is emotionally abusive or physically abusive or damages you in some way, having compassion for them doesn't say what you did is okay. It just says, I can see that you had damage too, and that's why this might have happened. And I can accept that. It gives a different version of the story because, like I said, a lot of the time, the urge is to, especially when you're just starting to deal with your trauma, the urge is to go, this person's a monster, and I'm going to show everyone that they're a monster so that everyone can see how horribly I've been treated. And I deserve all the sympathy and all the pass in the world, all the hall passes in the world, I guess, to be able to behave any way I want because I have trauma and I was harmed. The thing is, thinking like that is what gets people who probably did the harm to you because they didn't do the work to figure out how to deal with the damage that was caused to them by their parents or their circumstances or whatever it was. So compassion, it's a pretty simple thing. It's not an easy thing. I'm not going to lie. It's not something that you can say, this is easy. I mean, I still have anger over certain things that happen to me and probably always will. But along with the anger, I can have compassion for the people who caused these events, that they had damage too, that they had trauma or issues that caused them to behave the way they did. And that's just the reality of the situation. And honestly, compassion also works both ways. You have to have compassion for yourself too. You have to look at the fact that you made mistakes and you made poor choices and you reacted to your damage in ways that maybe damaged other people, and be compassionate for yourself. Because one of the things that I had to learn when I was younger, I did act out a lot. And I probably wasn't the most fun person to be around all the time. But I was acting out of the damage that was being done to me. I was crying out for help a lot of the time, and I wasn't getting it. And I was angry, and I was confused, and I was hurt, and I didn't like myself very much, and I didn't believe in myself at all. And so I did some things that I'm not terribly proud of, but I did them out of a place of damage. And I have to go back to that girl in her early 20s, late teens, whenever, and say, you know what? If I can say that my parents were doing the best they could and the other people that caused me trauma were doing the best they could in that moment, then I have to have compassion for myself, and I have to say I was doing the best I could too. It's a hard thing to do because I think sometimes our standards for behavior for ourselves are sometimes higher than other people's or sometimes lower than other people's because we feel like we've been damaged, so therefore we should get a pass and not have to be responsible and not have to worry about other people's feelings. That's not how it works. Compassion for everybody. Compassion for the people who hurt you. Compassion for you. It'll really help. The next thing that people need to give up is trying to be the hero of the story. And trying to be the hero of the story in the sense of, there are kind of two ways this works. One way is, look at all that I went through, and I'm here and I'm successful and I deserve kudos and applause, and you should all just think I'm wonderful. And that's, if the goal of telling your story is to get people to feel sympathy for you or to get people to admire how far you've come, then you're telling your story for the wrong reason. Honestly, that's my feeling. And I say this being fully aware that I tell my stories a lot and have told them a lot, but I'm telling them, I like to think, and I hope this is true, from a purpose of trying to be helpful, of trying to convey the lessons that I've learned from the things that I've gone through. So I'm not saying, look, I went through all this stuff and aren't I awesome now? I may think that, and sometimes I do. I think, dang, considering where I started, I've come pretty far. But I don't need other people to tell me that. That's something I know. So I'm not putting my stories out there to say, aren't I amazing? Don't you think I'm amazing? Don't you think I'm awesome? That's not the point of it. The point of it is that there's a lesson here. And also, honestly, the point of it is part of my healing. If I can take the things that happen to me that cause me pain and use them to help somebody else, then in a weird sort of way, there's a little bit of purpose to what I went through. I'm not saying it makes sense. I'm not saying that all the crap that people tell you about things happen for a reason and God only gives you, whatever trials you have the strength to withstand and all that other crap. That's crap. I'm sorry. There's no justification for some of the pain that people go through that would make it worth going through the pain. There just isn't. But if you can find a purpose from what you've learned and use what you've learned to help others, that can be helpful. So that's something to look at. But the other kind of trying to be the hero is the people who clasp on to their damage and their stories, like Gollum from Lord of the Rings, and they're, hoarding it and playing with it and looking at it and calling it my precious and telling their stories in such a way that really what they want is validation that they were harmed and sympathy and approbation that they made it through. And the problem with all of that is that a lot of people got harmed. A lot of people have damage in their own way. A lot of people had bad parents. A lot of people were abused. A lot of people had accidents or were teased or bullied or whatever it is. There's a lot of people who had those kind of problems. And if you're still holding on to it, if you're many years beyond it, and you're still going back to it and wanting people to validate that you were harmed and that whoever did whatever it was to you was an awful person and should be condemned or whatever it was, then you're not healing and you're not growing and you're not getting past it. All you're doing is basically being Gollum. You're just sitting there hoarding your pain and mulling over it and mulling over it. And the thing is, at some point, you have to just say it was what it was. And you have to acknowledge that not everybody who hears the story is going to hear it the same way you did. Not everyone who tells the story, like the other participants involved, is going to tell it the way you do. And that everybody has their pain. So if all we're going to do is spend our time walking around patting everybody on the head going, oh, that's so terrible, that's awful, that's horrible, yes, whoever did this to you was a monster, then we're not healing and we're not being productive and we're not getting anywhere. That doesn't mean minimize the pain. It doesn't mean don't get help for whatever damage might have happened to you, because God, please do that. But don't make yourself the hero. Don't make yourself the poor beleaguered person who's been put upon by everybody else and who deserves to be lauded and patted on the head and told what an amazing person they are. Because that's not the point of it. The point of telling your story should be, in my opinion, and this is strictly my opinion, should be to try to help other people, to illustrate a lesson, to help someone heal. It shouldn't be, look at what happened to me. Isn't this horrible? Isn't this awful? Isn't the person who did this to me just a total monster? And yes, I understand sometimes people tell their stories because they do need validation. Or because, there's a reason why there's a Reddit page called Am I an Asshole? Where people put up stories and ask other people, did I behave like an asshole in this situation? Because we do need validation and we don't always know. So I understand telling your story in that sense and going, hey, am I seeing this right? Am I right that this was a violation or damage or something wrong? I get that. I do. But there's a difference between that and basically wanting people to validate that you're a victim is really what I want to say. And if you're just looking for people to validate that you're a victim and to feel sorry for you and to maybe give you a pass, then stop it. Because that's not helpful and that's not worth it. Like I said, telling your story to get damage, telling your story to say, hey, this is how I felt about it, and seeing what kind of response you get back, that's one thing. But if you're telling your story to get sympathy, or you're telling your story so that someone will tell you how amazing you are, you're not going to get anywhere with that. It keeps you perpetually, like I said, like Gollum, mulling over your precious, your pain and your hurt and your anger, and you don't get beyond it. And the thing is, if you stay where you are, the person who damaged you wins. And you don't want that. You don't want that person to win. So move beyond it. Find the lesson in it. Accept what you need to accept. Get the help you need to get, and move on. The next thing is the other half of what I see people doing on social media a lot of the time when they're telling these stories is they're asking, is this right? Is this true? Am I what they say I am? If you grow up and you're told you're fat and ugly and nobody's ever going to love you, then part of you will always believe you're fat and ugly and nobody's ever going to love you. Even if you look at pictures of yourself and you go, I wasn't fat and I wasn't ugly. Now, whether anybody loves you or not is a subjective thing, or you get told every day when you're in elementary school because it takes you a little longer to learn to read that you're stupid, or whatever it is, or the kids tease you on the playground because you can't run as fast as they can, or whatever it is. So you grow up thinking you're not athletic, or you grow up thinking you're stupid, or you grow up thinking you're not worthy of love, or whatever it is. And because of that damage, then you react in ways that maybe are not in your own best interest, because you hook up with the guy who abuses you because you're desperate for love. Or you allow people to mistreat you because you feel like you're not worthy of love. Or you settle for a 9-to-5 job at McDonald's because you don't think you're smart enough to do anything more than that. And, there's nothing wrong with working at McDonald's if that's what you want to do, but that's not probably the be all and end all of anybody's career goals. So we get told a lot of things when we're kids. We get told a lot of things when we're adults. We get into relationships that are abusive. We get into relationships with people who emotionally and verbally and physically abuse us. We encounter bosses who bully us. We have people who tease us in school. We have a culture that especially tells women that if you're not a size 2 with long legs and big breasts, and if you have opinions or if you have boundaries, then you're substandard in some way. So all these things come up and you end up basically just going, am I really what they're saying I am? Am I really stupid? Am I really unlovable? Am I really the one that I always got hit with when I was a kid that still makes me laugh to this day, because there's an element of truth to it, but not quite to the level that it was thrown at me when I was a kid, was, you're so melodramatic. And I think a lot of my drama was trying to get someone to notice that I was in pain, that bad things were happening to me. And some of it was just the other blessing or curse, depending on what you want to name it, that I have, is that I'm pretty empathic, and I can see people's motives. And so I know, and when somebody says they love me and they're not behaving like they love me, then I can kind of feel that. I kind of get when people are lying to me. I know that. So I had a hard time, because a lot of what I was being told I knew wasn't true, and I knew wasn't accurate. And I knew when my parents were telling me, we're doing this stuff for your own good, that wasn't why they were doing it. They wanted me to be different than I was. They wanted me to be something they understood, and they didn't get me. And to be fair to them, I didn't really get them either. I mean, if there was ever a mismatch of child and parents, it was probably me and my parents. But it took me a long time. It took me probably until, heck, I'm still probably in the process of it now, to define myself, to say, are the things that I was told true? You know, was I really fat? Was I really ugly? You know, all those things. I don't think I was. I have visual evidence. I have pictures that I wasn't necessarily, but that was what I was told and what I believed for a very long time. And once you fall into that trap of listening to what other people are telling you, particularly when they don't have your best interest at heart, and if they don't have your best interest at heart, if they're operating out of their own damage, they may need to make you feel small to make themselves feel better. So just be aware of that, and really be analytical and clear about what you've been told about yourself. And sometimes it's hard to do that, because sometimes what happens is something that somebody told you that was negative, you will actually realize that, yeah, that's maybe right. I was always told I had a really negative attitude, and I was like, bullshit. It's all the stuff that's happened to me. And then I had a boss sit me down at one of my first real jobs and say, you are just a total black cloud, lady. It's not fun to be around you. You need to resolve this. And luckily at that point, I'd made enough progress that I could take in what was being told to me and look at it analytically and say, am I like that? And I was. And I probably was not a lot of fun to be around. So I did the work, and I learned how to be more positive, and I learned how to be a more positive force in the world. And I'm still grateful to that boss, because she didn't have to do that. She could have just written me off and said, she's a pain in the ass. I don't want to deal with her. We have a couple of comments here. Cindy says, oh dear, I am super substandard then. Ask me if I care. Nope, I am me, and take it or leave it. And that's actually the attitude that most of us need to have, which is, I'm me and you can deal with it. And then I have a Facebook user who says, we shape too much of our lives around other people's expectations of us. I have to work every day to listen to what I want, not to what I think everyone else might expect of me. And thank you, Facebook user. I don't know who you are. Facebook.com/StreamYard should allow us to see your name. StreamYard's kind of funny about that sometimes. I don't know why. But yeah, I agree with that. I have to work every day too oh, Melissa. Okay, it's Melissa. I love that. Thanks, Melissa, for being here. I appreciate that. And yeah, I totally agree with that comment. I have to work every day too to make sure that I'm doing what I think is best for me, and that I I have a realistic picture of myself. And it's not always easy because there's still parts of me that want to prove to people who told me certain things about myself that I'm not that person. And I don't like that. And that's why there are certain people that I don't spend a lot of time with in my life, because I still have a tendency to want to prove them wrong. And the thing is, even if I proved them wrong, they would never admit it. So it's a zero-sum game. And honestly, at some point, you just have to let other people's opinions of you go. You just have to say, I am, like Cindy said, I am who I am, and you can take it or leave it. And if you don't like it, then there's the door. And thank you for being here. Another trap that people fall into, and this is a tough one. Don't expect an apology from the people who hurt you. Don't expect an explanation. Don't expect even an acknowledgement in some cases. It's probably not going to happen. And the reason for this, a lot of the time, is that the self-view of the person who did the damage can't allow for them to acknowledge that they caused the damage. And they'll give you a lot of excuses as to why they were doing their best. They didn't really do what they said, what you're saying they did. You're misinterpreting it. You're misremembering it. There are a million excuses as to why whatever you're telling them and whatever event or series of events or, whatever damage you're showing them and saying, I want you to acknowledge that this happened and you hurt me and I'd like you to say you're sorry. They may not be able to do it. They just might not be able to do it. The closest I have ever gotten from my father to an apology is he said to me at one point, if there's anything you think I should apologize for, then I apologize. And I was like, well, that's basically saying, I really don't think I did anything, but because you seem to be upset, I'm going to say, I'm sorry. And that's not helpful. I mean, there are people who can do the work and who can look at the damage that they've done to other people and literally, genuinely understand what happened and apologize for it. It can happen. But don't expect it, and don't pursue it, and don't be mad when it doesn't happen. Because honestly, if you're waiting for an apology, you might die waiting for that apology. That's just how it is. It's just how it is. And if you're hung up on, I need acknowledgement and I need you to say you're sorry, then you can't move on. You're still stuck in that moment where whatever damage was done to you was done. Don't be that person. Don't stay in that moment. And honestly, I'm sorry is, how do I want to put this, is a crutch in a lot of situations. It's a way to try to get out of the situation without really dealing with it. So people put I'm sorry as the Band-Aid and say, I'm sorry, I did this. And you're supposed to go, okay, great, now we're good. Or people will say I'm sorry because they're hoping that we can all move past it and sweep it under the rug and never have to deal with it again, which is a technique that I find particularly abhorrent, I have to say. So we got another good comment here. So many people don't know they've hurt us. Learning to forgive them and yourself without the apology is more powerful and healing. And I think that's true too. And I like learning to forgive them and yourself, because part of waiting for an apology is also waiting for a blanket acknowledgement that you were the victim. You had no part in any of this. And the thing is, it's yes, there are situations where you had no part in what happened, definitely. But you may have taken that damage and acted out in other ways. So if you get an apology that clears the slate, then you may think that you don't have any responsibility to apologizing for apologizing to the people who hurt you. It can be a vicious cycle where everybody kind of thinks, well, because of what happened to me, I'm excused from taking responsibility for the damage that I might have done to others. Doesn't work that way. So part of the question that you have to ask yourself is, who do I owe an apology to? And can I make one sincerely and understanding what happened? And that's, I think, why if you go through a lot of the 12-step programs, making amends is one of the steps, because it makes you see the damage that you did and understand the damage that you did and sincerely take responsibility for the damage that you did. Because let's not mince any words here. That's what an apology is. An apology should be taking responsibility for the fact that you hurt someone or scared them or damaged them in some way, or, trespassed on their boundaries or whatever it was. That's what an apology should be. An apology a lot of times is, okay, I'm going to say I'm sorry in hopes that we'll never have to talk about this again. And we can just go on and have Thanksgiving or whatever it is. And to me, I think that's a bastardization of an apology. That's the exact wrong reason for an apology. And honestly, one of the most freeing things I ever learned was when I stopped waiting for the people who would cause me harm or had hurt me or whatever it was to apologize or to even acknowledge that they'd done it. When I got to the point where I didn't care if they ever said they were sorry, where I had compassion for them. I had understood as much as I could why they did what they did, given that sometimes you can't talk to them and they won't explain it to you. And I moved on, and I wasn't locked in that place where I was waiting for them to acknowledge and do a mea culpa of, whatever had happened. So I have to say it's very, very freeing, because I think for a lot of people, they think they can't forgive and they can't accept until they get an apology, and they can't move on until they get an apology. And they have this moment in their head, this big cinematic moment where whoever hurt them or belittled them or whatever it was is going to acknowledge that they're strong and capable and marvelous. And oh my God, they're so sorry for what they did. And, look at what an amazing human being you've become. And I'm so sad I missed out on that. It's a great fantasy. It makes a terrific movie. It doesn't happen a lot in real life. Sometimes it does. A lot of times it doesn't. And, like I said, it works both ways. If you're expecting an apology, who do you need to apologize to? Who do you need to have a conversation with where you say, I was operating out of a lot of hurt at this point, and I know I probably wasn't the most fun to be around, or I know I screwed up our relationship, or I know I made bad choices. So you have to ask yourself that too. If you're owed apologies, to whom do you owe apologies? Because both of these things are important. And Cindy says, maybe, and you may have done this, write it down and show them what they did to you and say, is this what you are apologizing for? Some may need their minds jogged. And yeah, that's an option. And what that depends on is the person that you want the apology from being open enough to be able to read what you wrote and understand it and accept it. And that's not always the case. But yeah, writing a letter can be helpful. If you keep a journal, showing people journal entries, if you're comfortable with that, can be helpful. But, in the end, you have to let go of the idea that an apology is going to make things right or make things better. Because honestly, even if you get an apology, you're still going to be dealing with all the damage you were dealing with before. Somebody just said they were sorry they caused it. And maybe that's enough, but I don't know. And in my experience, and granted, this is my experience only, the people that cause the damage aren't healed enough themselves or in touch enough with their own emotions to be able to understand what they did and why they did it and to offer a sincere apology. And I'd rather have no apology at all than an insincere one. That's just me. Another thing that people do a lot is they should. And, I should have had good parents. I should have had a good marriage. I should have had loving relationships. I should have had friends in high school who supported me, whatever it is. I think should is one of those words that almost really should be removed from, and I just said should, but really should be taken from the language. Because should is not reality. Reality is reality. And reality is you had the parents you had the high school experience you had the first marriage you had the first relationship you had the incidents with your friends that you had. If you're focused on, I should have had a happy family, I should have had less damage, I should have been protected, I should have been, whatever it is, you're not going to get anywhere because whatever should have happened, it didn't. So all you have to deal with is what actually happened and where you are right now. And so you need to let go of what the ideal world should be or what you think should happen. Because honestly, there is no should, because it didn't. And all you have is reality. And if you're, I call it, I've talked about this before, but it still makes me laugh. I call it the tragedy Olympics, where everybody is talking about their pain and their trauma and what should have happened and how their father should have been nicer to them, or how their uncle should never have molested them, or how their parents should have seen that the teacher was abusing them, or whatever it was. And the competition is kind of who has the worst story and who gets the gold medal in the tragedy Olympics. And the thing is, while you're obsessing over what should have happened and didn't, and what shouldn't have happened and did, you're not dealing with any of it. You're just rehashing it. You're just walking in the pain over and over and over again. And you're really almost damaging yourself. Instead, you just need to go, you know what? It should have been different, but it wasn't. This is my reality. This is the story that I have. These are the experiences that I learned from. So what am I going to do with it now? Am I going to let it continue to damage me, or am I going to make a new story? Am I going to tell a different story for myself? Am I going to learn whatever lessons there are from the things that happened to me and try to be different and better? And part of staying in should, what should have happened, what should have, my birthright as an American or whatever it is that you're trapped. You can't move forward if you're still stuck trying to change things that you physically cannot change until someone makes a time machine that actually works. And even then, you probably couldn't change it, because then you'd alter your life and you wouldn't be you. So there's a whole paradox here of, sci-fi tropes that are just not cool at all. This is funny. Our kids will say, Dad pulled my pants down and spanked me when I was little. We were like, I don't remember that, but if Dad did it, it was because you needed it. With 9 children, you don't remember it all. And yeah, that's true too. That, there are genuinely things that people might not remember. And you have to accept that as well. And you have to also accept the other half of what should be is that your story is your story. Everybody else involved in the situation has their story. And their story and your story may not agree. And it doesn't mean that you're wrong. It doesn't mean that they're wrong. It just means that you interpret things in different ways. That's why when people write memoirs about family situations, you'll often see in the beginning, there's a disclaimer that, this is my version of events, and that other people who are involved in these stories may not remember them the same way that I remember them. and may tell a different story than I do. And that's a legal disclaimer, yeah, but it's also just the truth. I mean, if you ask my sister and I about our childhood, we would have completely different versions of what it was like. Completely different. And we both lived in the same house. We both lived in the same, we both had the same parents. We had very different personalities. We're very different people. So the way we experienced things was very different. But we could describe the exact same event and have completely different interpretations of it. And have zero understanding of the other person's motive or why they behaved the way they did. So keep that in mind too. When you're talking about should, that the other people in the equation may have different shoulds than you, may see the story in a completely different way. So there's that too. But in the end, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter what should have been. It doesn't matter what people should have done. It only matters what happened, what is. And you need to wrap your arms around that. The good, the bad, the painful, the stupid, whatever, the happy, the joyful, whatever it is. You need to just wrap your arms around that and start figuring out what it means for your life. And let what you think should have happened go, because it didn't. So all you have to deal with is reality. Now, we were talking about everybody has a different story. Just because somebody else sees the same events differently than you do, doesn't mean your story is invalid. Your story is valid. It's the tale of the events as they happened to you. That's valid. And a lot of times what happens is when you go to someone who caused you damage and you're looking for an apology, or when you tell your story to family members or the people who hurt you, you get, well, that's not how it happened. Or you're so melodramatic. Or, something that basically invalidates how you feel and how you remember things. And a lot of times that's done as a defensive mechanism. A lot of times that's done because people are uncomfortable or people just can't acknowledge that they hurt you. And so they tell you that they didn't because I didn't mean it that way, or I was trying to help you, or, you needed to toughen up, or whatever it was. There are a million excuses that people can give you for how you remember things is not how they were. Your story's valid. How you feel about what happened to you is how you feel about what happened to you. And nobody has the right to say that's incorrect. Now, granted, we've all heard the stories of people who made up stories about being abused or whatever it was. And that does happen on occasion, but it's not very widespread. And most people who feel injured or have damage are telling a story that's a real story to them. That's their interpretation of events. And like I said, a lot of the people that you'll tell your story to may say, especially if they were involved in the story in some capacity, may say that's not what happened, or that wasn't the intention, or you're exaggerating, or you're being melodramatic, or whatever it was. Doesn't make the story any less valid. Your story is your story. Your story has validity. And I think one of the weapons that people will use a lot, especially when they feel bad about something they've done, is they try to make the other person think that they're remembering things incorrectly or they're interpreting things wrong, because they want their story validated. And their story is, I did the best I could, or I never meant to hurt you, or you're exaggerating, or that's not how it happened, or whatever their story is. So they're fighting for the validity of their story just as much as you're fighting for the validity of yours. And the paradoxical and crazy thing about all of it is that your story can be valid and their story can be equally valid from their perspective. Doesn't mean you weren't damaged. Doesn't mean they didn't do the damage. It just means that their story is their version of events and your story is your version of events. And one of the things that I always think is funny is occasionally people will get into battling stories where there's like a grudge match over whose story is the one that actually is true, or whose story is the one that actually is the official version, or whatever it is. And that there is no winning that battle because everybody has an investment in their story. So you just kind of, at the end of the day, you just kind of have to say, this is how I remember things. You may not remember them the same way. And I don't require necessarily that you remember them the same way. I do require that you accept that my interpretation and my thoughts on what happened to me are valid. And that doesn't mean you need to apologize. That doesn't mean you need to accept it necessarily. It just means this is what I think. And I don't really care what you think about what I think, honestly. This is what I remember. This is my interpretation of events. This is it. And invalidating people's stories can be a spectator sport almost. Because for a lot of people, hearing the story of somebody's pain, particularly if they feature in it, is uncomfortable and painful for them. And they don't want to acknowledge that maybe they didn't do a great job at being a parent, or maybe they didn't do a great job at being a spouse, or whatever it is. So it's just something to be aware of, that other people can tell you that your memories aren't your memories, that your interpretations aren't correct, but you don't have to believe them. You feel what you feel. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't get help and get therapy and learn and grow and understand that a lot of the pain and anger that you were dumping on other people maybe wasn't necessarily accurate. It doesn't mean that you can't learn compassion for the people who figure as the villains in your story, and you can't have a new understanding of them. Stories change as you grow and in your healing, and you learn more and you become more mature. Stories can change, and you can find compassion, and maybe the way you tell your story might be a little different. But in the end, your story is your story. Own it. Don't let other people tell you that it's not true and it's not right. Your story is your story. Your interpretation is your interpretation. And the last thing I really want to talk about, because I think this is probably the biggest lesson that I've gotten out of the things that I've gone through, is that telling your story and sharing the lessons that you've learned helps you heal. One of the things, when I started telling my stories, at first I told them so I could be the hero. I wanted everyone to acknowledge how much the world had shit on me and how awful things had been for me and how much damage had been done to me. And I wanted kudos, and I wanted, a pat on the back and someone to shake my hand and tell me what a superwoman I was. And so I was telling my stories for all the wrong reasons. And they were basically your classic hero villain stories. I was always the hero, and my parents or my boyfriend or the teacher who molested me or whoever it was the villain. And, look at how I was harmed. And then I learned to forgive myself, and I learned to forgive other people. Now, I want to forgiveness does not mean accepting. It doesn't mean you have to see those people. It doesn't mean you have to have them in your life. It doesn't mean you have to condone the way they behave now or behaved then. It just means you have compassion and you accept that they did the best they could within the circumstances of the time. A lot of people think forgiveness means you have to embrace the person and have them in your life. There are people that I have compassion for. There are people that I've forgiven and accepted, but I also don't like who I am when I'm around them, and I don't really like the way that they think of me. And so I don't spend a lot of time with them because it's not helpful to me. And that was part of my healing, was realizing that you can forgive someone and you can accept that they did the best they could, and you can feel compassionate towards them, and you can never see them and never have anything else to do with them ever again if you don't want to. You can do all those things simultaneously. It doesn't mean that you have to, I think, okay, I wasn't going to get into this, but I think one of the biggest myths we have, especially when it comes to family and family that's done damage to you, is family is everything. Family is forever. If it's family, you can never not have them as part of your life. I don't think that's true. And I take a rap for it from my family sometimes because I'm not close to a lot of them. And that's more because I don't like who I am when I'm with them. I don't like that I still feel compelled to try to prove that, hey, I made good. I don't like that. I don't like that feeling. And I also don't like that we've been estranged for quite a while, but they don't really know me anymore, and I don't really know them, but there's this assumption that they do. And that bothers me too. So part of my healing was saying, I'm a different person. If you'd like to do the work to try to get to know who I am now, then I'm willing to do that. But if you just want to operate on, we're not going to talk about anything and we're not going to acknowledge anything and we're just going to, pretend that nothing ever happened ever, then that's not attractive to me. There's no percentage in that for me. I don't understand what that gets us. So that's me. I don't feel, and maybe that's part of my damage, is that I have learned to be probably too independent. And I have learned to not rely on other people. And I have learned that people will leave and people will let you down. And that makes me cautious. And so I probably am a little too inner sometimes. I would agree. That's still something I'm working on. But at the same time, I've also learned that I have the right to say who's in my life and who isn't. And I have the right to tell the stories that I think are valid. And I have the right to say, this is just a relationship that's not good for me. And I need to move on from this, or I need to be sparing in how much time I spend in this person's company. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think I'm doing what's best for me. And, that's one of the valuable things that you learn when you go through the process of helping other people and healing other people, if you can, is that you have the right to make the decisions you need to make to heal yourself too. And oftentimes when you're trying to help others heal, you'll come across things you need to do to heal too. And one of the things I learned from talking to other people was that, you need to distance yourself from this person. If you had a spouse who was hitting you constantly, anyone who cared about you would say, get away from that person. This is stupid. Why are you still with this person? But especially sometimes in the case of emotional abuse, people, and especially if it's family, people will say, oh, well, you can't write off, blah, blah, blah. And I haven't written anybody off. But there are people that I don't spend a lot of time with because I don't like who I become when I'm around them, and I don't really like how they think about me. And I don't think that's a bad thing. And that doesn't mean that I'm not open to having a discussion about why things are the way they are. But if we can't get to that discussion, then, what can I do really except protect myself? And that's one thing I think that also healing others helps you remember, is that everybody has the right to protect themselves. Everybody has the right to try to avoid further damage. So, and just if you can find the positive, if you can find the lessons in what happened to you, and you can use them to help others, then some good comes out of what happened to you. And like I said, I'm not a big believer in God only gives you what you can handle or everything happens for a reason. I think those are kind of placebos, honestly. But I do believe that if you can find some way to help other people with what you have been through and the lessons you've learned, then you can help heal yourself a little bit. And I think that's important. And honestly, that was a little bit of what I was doing today, is here's some lessons I've learned. Hopefully, maybe some of this will be helpful for you and you can learn from it and we can all grow a little bit. That's really all I was trying to do. And like I said, I'd also seen some people on Facebook who seem to be just really rehashing things. And I thought that was a bad tendency. So I figured I had a free week. I'd do this little talk and hopefully maybe it makes a few people think. Next week, there will be a guest. I'm pretty excited about this. And I will put out the details early next week. I'm also going to be at DAC Chicago starting tomorrow. So if you are going to be at that show, please stop by and say hello. I'd especially love to see anybody who's a Women in Garment Decoration member. But I'd love to see all of you. I have missed the DAC shows. I have missed seeing all my friends at the DAC shows. So I'm really excited about being there. Thank you, everybody. That's just about an hour, and I'm pretty much at the end of what I want to say. Thank you for being here. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you next week.